If I don't know the answer, I will certainly, or my assistant Joan will certainly try to find the answer for you. Now, the types of ground covers could be natural organic mulch or natural inorganic mulch. The inorganic varieties includes things such as gravel, rocks, pieces of river rocks, or volcanic rocks, organic based such as wood chips, gorilla's hair, grasses, and of course, living plants, which are my favorites. Rocks can move about a little bit in your property, especially the smaller rocks. And regrettably, when I used rocks, when my children were young as ground covers, they found it irresistible to throw them about. So just be careful what you're considering as ground covers. And just to make sure you know the definitions between a mulch and an amendment, mulch is something to place on top of your soil, for example, to keep the soil moist. Rocks tend to heat up and keep the area warmer, whereas more of the organic mulches tend to keep things moist. Amendments are additions that are added to the soil and mixed in, such as fertilizer. Considering a little bit more about ground covers that are rocks, a lot of people use it to line walkways and patios and as a transition from the hard space to the soft space of the garden or grass. Of course, rocks provide no nutrients to the soil, and they're good for high traffic areas. Of course, they break down slowly. They tend to absorb the heat, releasing it in the evening. And they don't, as I mentioned, the important point is they don't provide any kind of nutrients to the soil. In a drought, however, you got to make sure you're careful in exactly where you're putting rocks, because if you're using them as a walkway, that's fine. But if you're using them in certain places of the garden, it could be problematic because of soil compaction. And as the soil is compacted, there's less air and water available to the root systems of the plants. And as things really heat up, the rocks, when they release the heat, can damage sensitive species of the plants, especially their root systems. So do be careful if you are going to consider rocks in a drought. Here are some examples of ground cover or organic mulch that you can consider. Bark, which can be shredded or chipped, pine needles, grass clippings, newspapers, shredded leaves, or straw. There's good and bad things about all of these things. Things such as composted leaves can prevent weeds. However, the dry leaves do provide nutrients, but they can blow away and are not very good as they can conduct a fire. For grass clippings, you could loosely apply them. Make sure you don't apply them too thickly because they can compact and prevent water from entering your soil. You also have to make sure they are free of herbicides or pesticides, which can damage your delicate crops. Newspapers, of course, are not very attractive and may limit oxygen exchange in the soil, although, of course, they inhibit weeds. And pine needles are attractive as well, but they could also prevent, if they're applied too thickly, water from entering. So there's always pluses and minuses to all of these different possible mulches. And remember, a mulch is what you leave on top of a soil. A little note about compost. It's generally applied as a soil amendment in the late fall or early spring in layers 1 to 2 inches deep. Coarse mulch can then be layered over it, enriching the compost to protect the young plants. Compost can be used as a mulch. A lot of the permaculturalists will use it as such, but you have to be careful that it's appropriately modified such that it's the heat when you're creating it is high enough to kill the weed seeds, because otherwise you're just adding seeds of weeds to your yard or your garden. Now, a little bit more about that organic mulch. It holds water better than topsoil alone. It protects topsoil from washing away in the rain and keeps the plants cooler, but it doesn't last forever. It also makes things look neater. As you can see, this is the stone pathway. This looks like some mulch here, organic mulch that is attractive with these various grasses that are growing. And mulch doesn't last forever. It will periodically need replacement, especially if it's matting. Wood chips of pine, cedar, and cypress work best to repel pests. And you could notice that the wood chips are around the various beds in this community garden, not in the beds. I found it, if I use wood chips around or in the beds before the plants have a chance to germinate, they actually will prevent not only the weeds, but your plants from germinating. So I tend to use them around the various raised bed, and something a little lighter within the raised bed that things can grow through. For example, I've used straw, and I've covered it over with some chicken wire to keep it in place. There's been some talk whether or not you use fresh or aged wood chips. The fresh wood chips pulling nitrogen from the soil and inhibiting your plant growth. But several studies have shown there's really no significant depletion using fresh wood chips. And this is from the Texas A&M Extension. And of course, gorilla hair mulch is another choice, produced from bark of the redwood or red cedar. You usually apply a layer of 2 to about 4 inches to prevent soil compaction in areas with high foot traffic, and leave a little bit of open ground around your plants to let air to reach the stems. Once the mulch begins to mat, occasionally inspect the soil under it to make sure it's getting enough water and not harboring weeds. This looks very attractive around your plants. We have a lot of it mulched, used as mulch around some of our plants in our town complex. And of course, my favorite, the living ground covers. These are plants of different textures, cultural needs, and growth habits that spread. That's the key thing. Some are low to the ground, and they usually go up until about 24 inches high. They're still considered ground covers. And landscape water use accounts for about 55% of the residential water used across the state of Colorado, most of which is on turf. That's why we're trying to propose that alternatives to regular turf. This particular photo is a photo of sedum. I'll get more into that later, but sedum is a great ground cover. It easily spreads, it inhibits weeds, and like I said, I'll get a little bit more into it later. Before I go into more details about the living ground covers, which will cover plants as well as shrubs, I wanted to see if you had any questions about the inorganic or organic mulches and ground covers I described. Joan, is there anything there?
So far, we have a question about the Manitou Springs Pollinator Project.
Oh, okay.
So why don't you address that? And then I hadn't seen a question yet, but that one came up first.
Okay, the Manitou Springs Pollinator Project is going to be during Pollinator Week, which is a week of about June 20th to June 27th or so. Basically, there's going to be demonstrations, talks about pollinators, and various exhibits. It's going to be both in the MAC building, the Manitou Arts Center. I'm actually giving a talk about pollinators, and one of the gentlemen, David Woolley, who is associated with as a seed saver, he's going to give a talk especially about bees as pollinators. My focus will be a little bit about other kinds of insects like Oh, butterflies, wasps, moths, bats, all the alternative pollinators. So do come if you're around. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Can I find that as a link? I wasn't able to. Manitou Springs Pollinators Project.
I don't know if they've advertised it quite yet, but I will send it to you, Joan.
Okay. And then a question about whether or not gorilla hair will work on a steep slope.
Typically, gorilla hair doesn't really blow away. It tends to mat over time. So you probably can use it on a steep slope. What I also suggest is actually a living ground cover that spreads and is very dense, because living ground covers of a certain kind, and I could get into that later, that create a lot of adventitious root systems, can really keep that soil in place and prevent erosion. Also, there's certain plants that are especially good for slopes. So you can consider a variety of alternatives. You know, there's not one choice of ground cover. You could, you know, usually people give a variety. I hope that answers the question. Anything else?
Yes, I'm going to unmute myself. Pine trees in my yard, will these ground covers live under pine trees? So she's talking about live ground covers. Will they live under a pine tree?
Yeah, there's actually one that I get into shade-loving plants. I get to it a little bit later that will live under a pine tree.
Okay.
Can't think of it right now, but if I
We'll
don't
wait
get
for
to
that.
it, pardon me?
We'll just wait for that
Yeah.
as you proceed.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, I found it. It's Mahonia repens, and I'll get to that later. All right, why ground covers? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's to prevent soil erosion. It's a design element, and it's useful where grass is not practical. What I have here, what I'm showing here is something called creeping thyme. It's a perfect for rock walkways, around stepping stones. It can be used as a turf substitute in some landscapes where foot traffic is light. It's also known as mother of thyme and forms a low, dense evergreen mat. It blooms profusely in early summer, but doesn't compete well with other plants. So consider that where you're going to locate it. You should mulch it in the winter after the first year to prevent frost heaving and winter damage, and water it once during dry periods, once a month during dry periods in the winter. What I've done is I'm going to give you examples of some ground covers. There are many examples, and some of the references that I provide later, you could always go into and take a look at and see if the characteristics of those plants match what you're looking for. But I've tried to extract a few examples of a variety of kinds. This is something that Joan knows about. It's Friends of the Extension. We have tours during the summer of various hosts who have beautiful gardens. And you could see in this particular garden, a variety of ground covers. You see the sedum here. You see some, it looks like perhaps some gorilla mulch. You see pebbles, and you see a little bit of lawn. Notice how it's connecting some of the plants. This is a beautiful dense layer of sedum where the owner hardly has to weed. It's so dense. And I do like the connection and the different kinds of ground cover, the way the person has designed this. So a little bit about lawns. I know some of you may have heard about it, but depending on the type of grass that you choose, it could be a lot of work. Basically, Kentucky bluegrass can look great, but it can be problematic, especially as Colorado gets drier. And you heard a little bit about that earlier, because bluegrass and ryegrass require 2¼ inches of water per week, especially under the hot, dry, windy summers that we're likely to continue to experience here. Thatch is a challenge. That is the tight brown, spongy organic layer of both living and dead grass roots and stems that accumulates. You have to dethatch your lawn, and you have to schedule fertilizing and amendments and pesticides and mowing. There's a lot of work for this, this particular kind of grass. Things that are not native, of course, require a lot more work. And what you see here is disease that people often see here in Colorado. This is called necrotic ring spot caused by a fungus. Evidently, the homeowners overwatered their lawn, and they're getting this fungus appearing. You really, it's emphasized as a master gardener to tell folks to consider native grasses or lawn-like plants as alternatives that don't require a lot of work and are, and since they're adapted here, they don't require all the work that lawns such as Kentucky bluegrass would need. And here's some native grasses of the Front Range: buffalo grass and blue gamma. Although these grasses grow a bit higher and not really think of them as ground cover, they are alternatives to a lawn. Blue gamma grass was officially stated as the Colorado state grass in 1987, drought tolerant, clump forming, and it's a warm season grass growing actively in the summer. And the reason why we try to emphasize native plants, because there are hosts for a lot of the pollinators. In this particular case, the blue gamma is the host for the Leonard skipper, which is like a butterfly, and a couple of other skippers, and they grow in a variety of soils. Here are some other lawn alternatives: the blue fescue, which you see on the left, which forms tight mounds. Sometimes people use these as ground covers. There's a lot of cultivars, so you got to read up a little bit about it at your nursery to see which one might suit your area best. This is a lovely ground cover. It's known as Turkish Veronica. It's a durable, low maintenance alternative lawn, and it can tolerate occasional foot traffic. Grows to a height of 1 to 2 inches, 15 to 18 inches wide, flowering in April and June. And it is deer resistant and good for pollinators. So one of the things we emphasize is, how do you figure out what you want? Well, plan your overall design. Get rid of your weeds before you're planting. How much sun is in certain areas and how much is shade to obtain the proper layout of your garden, and considering all your different plants. Low growing ground covers usually are used for smaller areas, and taller ones for larger areas or steep slopes. I know I've talked a little bit about watering needs. So just so you know, moderate water use means watering about twice a week. Low water use means 1 watering per week. And very low, or xeric, is 1 watering every other week or so. So that's important to consider when you're thinking about your ground cover plants, how much water. And of course, plants that grow in shade, of course, every plant needs some sun, but a plant that is shade tolerant usually needs about 4 hours of sun a day. Partial sun or partial shade is usually about 6 hours, and full sun is 8 to 10 hours a day. So keep those definitions in mind. All the plants that I'm going to show you are water wise and can grow in Colorado. And of course, as I said before, it's always best to get the native species that are better adapted and are good for the various pollinators. When you're considering ground covers, plant sufficiently dense to inhibit competition from weeds. I already talked about the plants in the drought conditions, and I'm going to show you some examples. This is something known as candy tufts. You may be familiar with it. It's, although non-native, it does attract a lot of pollinators. It's ground hugging. It can be used as pathway edging, and it usually blooms around May. It's a slow grower with a mature size of 12 to 18 inches tall, 12 to 16 inches wide per plant, It does grow in our alkaline soils and is moderately salt tolerant, deer and rabbit resistant. The name comes from a city in the island of Crete, where apparently the plant originated. This is another alternative. This is lily turf, which is neither a lily nor turf, but it does guard against erosion. It can grow in full sun or shade and tolerant to many soil types, and certainly drought tolerant once it's fully established. And it loves sunny locations, especially, and blooms profusely. It doesn't really tolerate much foot traffic. As I mentioned previously, ground covers can be shrubs or plants. I'll get into the shrubs later. Of course, those that have the flowers and fruit require a little bit more maintenance. And make sure you know your growth considerations before you obtain your ground cover. As I mentioned earlier too, they do spread very easily. This particular plant here is known as sulfur flower. It is a native plant, and it's host to the lupine blue, which is a larvae of the butterfly. Native bees love it. It can grow in sun or part shade. It likes to grow in gravelly soils, and it does vary. The species do vary. So again, consider the various species and your what you're planning for your garden when you go to the nursery to pick up such a plant. This is a very convenient fact sheet. There's a wealth of information in it on a variety of ground covers for dry and sunny regions, sun to part and to deep shade. So make sure you consult this. You could also contact us via the help desk if you want to know more information about ground covers. Again, I'll show you a few more examples that work really well here. This is the Penstemon capituous. It is native to Colorado and Wyoming. Grows to about 1 to 2 inches high with 12 to 14 inches spread. It is a blue to a light purple color. It works in clay and loam and well-drained soils, and it pairs well with the coral bells and various lavenders. Its water needs are low, and it's very good for pollinators. Here is a beautiful plant known as the Mount Atlas daisy. It spreads mainly to cover a large area, mainly through self-seeding, although it does have rhizomes. Its bloom time is early summer with a mature height of 3 inches and spread of 12 inches. It's non-native. It's native to Morocco, but it has adopted well here, and it does attract butterflies and bees to your garden. So I'm just going through, as you could see, a variety of ones that I picked out that I thought were quite beautiful. This is the Aster Woods Blue. Spreads through underground stems, and just be careful, rabbits like it. So if you have an area where rabbits are prevalent, it's not the right ground cover for you. It's sun-loving, mature height of 8 to 12 inches. It is native to various places in North America, not necessarily Colorado, but it is a beautiful plant that it does attract pollinators. One of my favorites, pussy toes, and you could see why it gets this name with its blooms resembling a cat's paw. It does very well in sunny locations, preferring infertile soil. So if you have areas in your yard that are not necessarily maintained, or you're not adding amendments, but you do want to put a simple plant in that doesn't require much, much amendments or much care, think about the pussy toes. It's listed as a Colorado native, and it actually prefers the infertile soil. It spreads 8 to 12 inches and it can reach a height of about 8 to 12 inches and a spread of 2 feet. And it flowers mid to late summer. Here's some additional flowering drought tolerant plants: the trailing lantana, the creeping phlox, the spreading daisy and snow in summer. This is lantana, which is thriving in extreme heat and drought, and is deer and salt resistant, attracting butterflies and bees. Native to South America, it would need replacing here because it does act more like an annual here. Here is creeping phlox, which grows to about 12 inches high and tolerates a variety of pHs, native to North America. And it does require some supplemental watering in very high drought or extreme hot conditions. And you could tell because it starts to scorch. So this one you just have to be a little careful with. This is the spreading daisy and the Angelita daisy. The Angelita daisy, not pictured here, is something that can actually tolerate heat as well as extreme cold, drought tolerant once established. This particular plant, the spreading daisy, is listed as a Colorado native. Growing to about 1.5 feet tall, it can grow in full sun or shade, requiring very little moisture. You'll see it along the roadsides. It's host to a variety of native butterflies, bees, and moths, and flowers in the spring and summer. And this plant is known as snow and summer. Native to Italy, it's a member of the carnation family and is deer resistant. It can be invasive, and what people do is dig a 5-inch deep edge to try to keep it in its borders. But if you have a very large area that you want to have that's not turf, that is drought tolerant, this may be an alternative. Grows to about 6 inches tall. Okay, I've shown you a wide variety, or I should say, a variety of flowering plants that I've chosen that are quite beautiful, especially in drought conditions, and taken it from the resource that I showed you earlier. Are there any questions?
Not a question yet, but can you remind everyone the difference between deer resistant and deer proof?
Well, in my mind, nothing. If an animal is absolutely starving, it will eat any plant. So deer resistant means they don't particularly like it, usually because of it has like bristles or spines or something that will deter the animal, or it smells funny. Things that are really highly fragrant are deer resistant. I would say deer intolerant, or what was the other one? I'm sorry, deer proof.
Deer proof, right?
Yeah, deer proof I would think of as probably like a cactus or something like that, that is very difficult for the animal to access. But again, anything, if an animal is starving, it will eat anything.
Okay, no more questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. So the next section, I'm going to focus on some shrubs, some more shrubs, some xeric plants, and some shade-loving plants as ground covers. So if you like, or if you prefer, you can also use shrubs as ground covers. 2 examples are here: the Acacia juniper and the Guernsey green juniper. The Acacia juniper is tolerant of heat and drought, poor soil conditions, and even some foot traffic. It can grow about 24 inches tall, and excuse me, it requires little fertilizer after establishment. You should use some winter watering to help prevent winter dehydration. It is not native, and there are several varieties of it. So make sure you talk about your your garden conditions with your nursery before purchasing any, because some varieties may be better than others. The Guernsey juniper, seen on the right, is a ground-hugging evergreen with silver to black berries that hails from the western prairies of eastern Wyoming, semi-desert kind of area. It's happy in shade as well as full sun, and it's one of a handful of western native nursery plants that can actually tolerate dry shade. It's very difficult to grow plants in dry shade. Typically, those kinds of plants need at least moderate watering. Here's another choice of a low-growing spreading shrub, the Hancock coralberry. It can spread, each individual plant can spread up to 10 feet, growing about 2.5 feet high. Although non-native, it can grow in sun or part shade. You water it about once a week. And cutting the stems to ground level in late winter every few years can rejuvenate its appearance, and new branches will regrow from the roots. A variety of birds will come to your yard to eat the berries, and is a good plant to fill the low maintenance area. This is a beautiful plant that you may see in the fall, turning a beautiful coppery color. The leaves turn copper color in the fall. It's aromatic and it can grow. This should be 6 to 12 inches. I'm sorry, not feet. Several sources named it as a native plant. Some of them are, some sites say that it's not native, but I would say it probably is native, as it does attract a number of small animals and birds to eat its berries. And the bird that really likes it, if you've ever heard of the Townsend solitaire, that's a bird that really loves this plant. It is a larva host also to the hair-streaked butterfly. So this is a truly beautiful plant that you could consider. The mock bearberry manzanita is a broadleaf evergreen. It tolerates Colorado Springs dry winters and periodic droughts. It is a hybrid of 2 other manzanitas. It can be grown as a ground cover or cascading over a wall or a boulder. It's one of the few broadleaf evergreens that can tolerate the dry winters and droughts of our area. It grows in sun or part shade with a mature height of 10 to 15 inches and blooms in the early spring. It requires moderate watering for the first 2 years until it's established, and then requires very little supplemental garden. It has grown successfully in several areas in Colorado Springs. The Pawnee Butte sandberry, you can see its characteristics here. This variety does stay low to the ground. It's excellent for ground cover because a single plant can spread up to 6 feet, and it's relatively easy to grow with fragrant white flowers blooming in the late spring, and its foliage turns a mahogany color in the fall, and again attracts it attracts bees, butterflies, and the birds will eat its fruit. Now, I had gone to a talk by a gentleman named Ron Henne of Littleton, Colorado. He's one of the members of the Cactus and Succulent Society. So he's always looking for companion plants for such plants. He has mentioned the Gensania lydia as a ground cover. This particular ground cover is extremely hardy. It will grow in those hot, dry south and west exposure, especially in things like traffic islands and places that are usually extremely difficult to grow any kind of plant, let alone a ground cover. And it does bloom in May and June. It tolerates the alkaline soils of our area. It's deer resistant and pretty insect resistant, and can grow up to 2 feet high. He mentioned that it is a new ground cover, like I said, in these very, very difficult areas. So you may consider this if you have a western or southern exposure, an area that you haven't been very successful growing plants before. This is a good alternative. This is the Zinnia grandiflora, Rocky Mountain zinnia, native to our area. It is very rugged and durable. It's also beautiful. It exists in conditions in rocky, sandy soil, survives severe heat, strong winds and cold temperatures. It is, again, this particular plant can also survive in south-facing slopes and along hot driveways. It spreads via rhizomes, making it a go-to plant for the erosion management on steep or sandy slopes. I think there was a question about that earlier. It has a long bloom time for most of the summer, making it ideal for perennial rock gardens and borders. And a lot of beneficial insects are attracted to its bloom, and its pollen and nectar will attract, of course, the butterflies, moths, and bees. It's resistant to deer and according to the article, rabbits as well. So you could consider this plant. This is one of my favorites, the ice plant. You can see a lot of the examples in the Xeric Gardens up on Mesa, as well as the Denver Botanical Gardens, which I urge you to go to if you want to get an idea about other ground covers as well. This has doesn't grow very high, about I think 6 inches maximum, and it has these lovely succulent-like leaves. It comes in a variety of colors. It's low maintenance, best cleaned up in early spring before it resumes active growth for the season. It does attract bees and butterflies to your yard, and I believe it is native to South Africa. So that is the ice plant, and this is just one example of the various colors. I mentioned sedum before. This particular sedum is gold moss sedum, spreading over a wide area, can grow in a variety of pH and grows quite densely. And a lot of the sedums can turn a beautiful coppery color, the leaves, in the fall. It can grow in very poor soil, and it's suitable for sandy, loamy, or clay soils, and it could handle a variety of pH, which is great because of typically our high pH or alkaline soils here. Next, I'll go into a little bit of ground cover for shade. This is snow on the mountain. It grows to a height of 8 to 12 inches, requires moderate water. That means twice a week. Again, plants that typically grow in dry shade do require a little bit more water. If the leaves do scorch in a dry spell, you could always shear to the ground level to encourage some new growth. This particular plant is aggressive, fast growing, and can form a very thick ground cover in part shade or full shade. As I mentioned, because it's aggressive, it can outcompete other flowering plants and ground covers. So plant it in an area where you don't mind it taking over and spreading. It can be effective for covering the ground under trees. I think there was a question earlier about pine trees, and there's one more as well. This particular plant can grow 8 to 12 inches high and is native to Europe. Another plant that is a slow-growing native evergreen shrub grows 1 to 3 feet tall and spreads slowly by underground runners to form wide drifts. It has yellow flowers that appear in the late spring through early summer and is followed by blue berries. It can grow either in full sun, or part shade, and is resistant to predation by deer. And according to the article I read, it can be grown as ground cover for dry shade under oaks or pine. So this is another choice of a plant that can grow under some other pine trees or other trees. These are some other shade and ground covers from a plant talk that's available on our site that will tolerate some drought. Dead nettle to the left, bungleweed in the middle, and sweet woodruff to your right. Dead nettle grows to about 8 to 12 inches, flowering April to June. Bungleweed is good for erosion control because it forms a dense mat that will discourage weeds. You water it every 2 to 3 weeks once it's established. and woodruff will tolerate some drought, but you have to water it in times of prolonged drought. It's a good ground cover in shady areas, and it bears pretty clusters of white star-shaped flowers in the spring, has a very fragrant aroma, and is easy to grow and adapts to a wide range of pH, and is deer resistant, and is considered one of the few rabbit-proof flowers. Again, as I mentioned earlier, nothing is completely rabbit or deer-proof. If the animal is starving, it will eat anything, but because of it, again, its fragrance, it's probably why it is more rabbit-proof and deer-proof than, say, other flowers. Okay, so that is my talk. Are there any other questions at this time?
We did have a question about your ice plant, and I didn't catch
Sure.
the variety. Was that particular one perennial? Did it come back easily?
Yes, those, if I go back, let's see if I could go back.
I know some are more hardy than others.
Yes, this particular kind, the purple kind that I show here, is more drought tolerant and will come back. Let me just go to my reference for that. You hang on a minute. Basically, there will be some dieback in winter. You should mulch it, and it has yeah, it has that. This particular variety has turns a gorgeous burgundy in the fall. The fruit is not ornamentally significant, but basically this variety, the purple one, is the one that will come back in the winter. I mean, come back in the spring. I'm sorry.
Okay.
These you really have to mulch though, to take care of them, and you have to trim them a little bit, because they will die back a little bit in the winter. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And I don't see any other questions. I failed to mention that we do have a poll we'd like for you to take. It's only 2 questions, but we'll stick around if you have any other questions to put up. Please feel free to put them in the chat, and we can visit for another 10 minutes or so. There's your poll. I think everyone will get a copy of the PowerPoint if you want to look back through there. And again, you had also a copy of the handout in the email that was sent to you just prior to the class.
Yeah, so I urge everybody to look at those references, especially the ones about the ground covers. There's a lot more different plants that you could choose from. And typically what people do is they have a variety of ground covers, both inorganic, like they use mulches, of course, like the Gorilla mulch and pebbles, as well as the actual living plant. So you could design your own garden that way.
Marion, could you go back to your resource list?
Sure.
Try not to cover it up with the poll.
People can just slide the poll out of the way of the slides.
Oh, okay, great. That's helpful.
Yeah, there you go.
And I believe these are on your handout as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the important thing is also you could look at some of the ground covers and the Xeriscape Garden up at Mesa in Colorado Springs. They have a lot of I believe that and Denver Botanic, as I mentioned earlier, did show a variety of the ice plants, which I thought were really, really cool looking plants.
And do you know if the plumbago is deer resistant?
The which?
The hardy plumbago. I always forget the name of it. You know, it has blue flowers. Did you show that one?
let's see.
I believe it's resistant in my yard, but I don't know if you had information on that.
I don't have it on, excuse me, I don't have it on hand.
Okay.
High Country Gardens website does say that it is deer resistant.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, I've had deer eat some of my supposed deer resistant plants. So again, there seem to be a lot of them around. And I think the problem is with the sort of drought conditions. I mean, now maybe it's improving a bit, but they're always looking for well-maintained plants. And if it's easy to come by, they will eat that.
Okay, anything else? Someone has a steep sloping backyard in Peyton that gets sun all day and is clay soil.
Mhm.
Having a hard time figuring out what to do with it. And this has given her many ideas. So she's thanking you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Rocky Mountain zinnia and the the one recommended by Ron Hannay, the gentian, those are both apparently, the reason why I put those in there is they're very good for erosion control, and they also will tolerate very dry, hot conditions.
Very good. More people are thanking you. And I think, let's see, we had one more. Anyone else want to take the poll?
It looks like the participants that are on have already.
Okay, great. And I've written the numbers down, so thank you very much.
Last question. Do you have suggestions for shrubs that grow well in the shade?
Shrubs that grow well in the shade. I think other than the ones I've mentioned, let's see, I think it was the Mahonia riapens. That was an example.
And
Yeah, it is more challenging, definitely, to grow shrubs or any kind of flower in full shade. And again, that's 4 hours or more. Let's see, I'm just looking at the Mahonia.
Repens.
Yeah,
Marion, I'll send Jerry, who asked that question. I'll make sure everybody has a fact sheet about shrubs that grow in shade when I send the recording.
that would be great. That would be
Okay.
great.
All right.
I have found that Mahonia repens will get leaf scorch in the hot sun. So, and I really like that one because it has great texture, leaf texture. So it appears to look like a shrub when it's growing, whether it's listed as a perennial or a shrub. But I think it's a great plant for a shady area.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you for your personal experience. That's just it. And one of the things one could consider is keeping a journal and seeing what worked and what didn't work. So, as you go along, you may find ground covers that may not work and ones that do work. And, you could take it and do some experimenting.
You're getting a lot of thanks too, Marion.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
glad to hear that. Yeah. And what folks that asked about the pollinator festival, that should be advertised in the near future. Again, it's around the 20th. I'm actually, like I said, I'm giving a talk either the Monday or Tuesday, either the 20th or 21st. It's going to be right near Mansions Garden, which is right near the town hall in Manitou. And it's also, some of the talks going to be given at if you're familiar with it, the Manitou Art Center, the MAC. I don't know if Colorado Springs is doing a pollinator festival or not, but a lot of towns across Colorado are. Does
Okay.
anybody have any experience they want to share, or we have about 5 minutes left?
I can share that on Snow on a Mountain that it really does take over.
Ah, okay,
I
yes.
had it mixed in with raspberries.
Oh,
And it pretty much has taken over. Well, this last year I haven't watered. I've been trying to kill everything off so that I could figure out what to do with ground cover and stuff. Because I have pine trees, and the pine trees kept killing the grass, and it was like an uphill battle.
oh my
So
gosh.
So I gave up. But I still have grass. I mean, it's been like 2 years since I've watered. I have a sprinkler system, and it's been 2 years since I've watered my lawn, and I still have grass.
Wow,
I
That's
know, in
incredible.
spots, and not all over, but anyway.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, right here in Manitou, there's some areas that have some beautiful grass, but you really have to maintain it to make it look like that. So it's much easier using natives. Plus, over time, use a lot of water. I didn't mention it, but the water utilities company is telling people to water, before 10 o'clock or after 6 p.m. to minimize the evaporation, and that goes, I think, from May 1st until October 15th. So hopefully there won't be any severe water restrictions. I mean, I'm looking out my window and I see it's snowing out, so that's good.
Yes. Well, it's really interesting. I'm a retired utilities person, and it just amazes me when I walk and see people at high noon watering their yards. It's like, don't you realize it doesn't do you any good? It just evaporates.
Right,
But
exactly.
but anyway, I guess they have lots of money.
And it magnifies on the lawn and can burn your lawn. I mean,
Right, yeah.
it attracts those sun rays so strongly.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Surely. I'm going to stop sharing now and just wave, thanking everybody for coming. And don't
Yeah.
forget to come to some more of our Lunch and Learn talks, and please contact our help desk should you have any questions. I had that on my last slide, which I don't know if I showed, but
On their handout too.
yeah, it's on the handout. So if you have any gardening questions, make sure to contact our help desk. And I think we're open in person as well.
We start opening in person on April 18th on Mondays and Wednesdays.
Thank you.
And it will continue that way through the summer until almost the end of October. The 26th, I think, will be our last in person. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that if you don't follow us yet on the Eventbrite page, if you follow us, then you'll get notifications when we post a new class. And I just posted a new class yesterday. We're doing a basic botany class that anyone can take. And we also are doing a low maintenance, low water landscaping with native plants workshop. It's a 3-hour in-person workshop in May. So make sure you check out those things in our Eventbrite, and you'll also see it on Facebook if you're on Facebook. And I think Alyssa is also posting in Instagram. So you can find us all over the place, but try to keep up with all of our stuff. We've got lots of groups that are providing classes on natives and water-wise gardening. So please learn as much as you can to help our environment. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And
Mary,
thank you.
excellent presentation. So
And
well.
thank you, Joan, for assisting.
Yeah, excellent job assisting as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll hope to see you next week.
Bye-bye now.